Welcome back to Criminally Human, where behind every headline is a person, a story, and a tragedy that didn't have to happen. Tonight isn't just another episode. This is the finale of the Ritual series, the last chapter in a story that's taken us from Amityville, to Idaho, to Samuel Little, and beyond. We've followed the patterns, the silence, and the numbers that keep repeating across decades. And now, we bring it all together. Because if there's one thing this series has shown, it's that rituals don't end when the case is closed. They leave signatures that echo through time. This is the finale. And the real question isn't if the ritual will repeat. It's when. Everyone thinks they know the Amityville horror. They've seen the movies, they've heard the stories of a haunted house, and they think it's just another piece of pop culture. But what most people never stop to think about is that before there was ever a haunted house, before Hollywood cashed in on it, there was a heavily stained tragedy. This tragedy also happened on November 13th. 6 members of the DeFeo family lost their lives in their sleep, and the details of that night read less like a random family tragedy and more like a ritual. Ronald DeFeo Jr. was 23 years old when he used a weapon inside the home at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. His parents, his 2 brothers, and his 2 sisters, all gone. But what made this tragedy different, what made it echo like a ritual, was the silence. Every single victim was found lying face down in bed. No signs of movement. No one appeared to resist. And somehow, none of the neighbors claimed to hear anything, even though 6 lives were ended suddenly in the middle of the night. Silence became the loudest part of the story. And here's something else. Every person was positioned face down. Think about that. If it were chaos, people would have been turned, moved, running. Instead, it looked arranged. Like a ritual, not a rampage. DeFeo himself later said he heard voices urging him to act. Were they hallucinations? Or was he being used as the vessel for something darker? When ritual takes over, it's not always about the one carrying it out, it's about the pattern that controls them. Now let's stop here, because this is where the ritual begins to show itself. 112 Ocean Avenue. Numbers don't lie. That house number, 112, carries the same energy as 1122 King Road in Moscow, Idaho, where the 4 University of Idaho students lost their lives decades later. Both addresses became infamous tragedies. Both addresses carried numbers tied to chaos and imbalance. When you break it down, 112 or 1122, the repetition, the imbalance, the disruption of order. That's not coincidence. That's a signature. Those numbers carry meaning. 11 has always been tied to betrayal, to imbalance. In symbolic traditions, it's what you're left with when Judas falls away, disrupting the 12. 22 is called the master builder, creation, permanence, structure. But in the wrong hands, it's about building chaos, not creation. Add them all up, 1 + 1 + 2 + 2, and you get 6, the number tied to humanity, weakness and flesh. So was it just an address? Or was it chosen because the numbers already told the story? And then there's the date. The Amityville tragedy happened on November 13th, 1974. The Idaho 4 tragedy happened on November 13th, 2022. Almost 50 years apart, but the same date. And it's not just a date. In esoteric tradition, the number 13 is the disruption of order. 12 represents balance. 12 months, 12 zodiac signs, 12 tribes, 12 disciples. 13 breaks the cycle. It's the intruder, the destroyer, the mark of chaos. So when you see 2 separate events fall on November 13th, you start to ask, how many times does 13 have to show up before we stop calling it coincidence and start calling it ritual? And here's where it gets even darker. In Amityville, neighbors reported silence. 6 lives gone in the night. In Idaho, the roommates who survived didn't call for help until hours later, despite multiple victims being deceased under the same roof. Again, silence. It doesn't matter if it was fear, confusion, or something else. The fact is, silence played a role in both tragedies. In ritualistic patterns, silence is just as much a part of the ceremony as the act itself. Fraternities use silence in their initiations. Freemasons swear oaths of silence. Scientology enforces silence with fear of destruction. Silence protects the ritual. Now let's widen the map. Because there's another case tied to November 13th. A man named Samuel Little. He's not a household name like Bundy or Dahmer, but he should be. He confessed to 93 tragedies over 4 decades, making him the most prolific serial offender in American history. His violence didn't come from a trigger or a blade. He chose overpowering his victims. Almost always women. Almost always vulnerable. Sex workers, drug users, women living on the margins of society. The ones nobody in power paid attention to. He would find them in bars, on roadsides, in alleys. He would lure them, overpower them, and leave them in abandoned lots, woods, and hidden corners of cities across the country. Police didn't connect the dots. For many, many years, they wrote the losses off as overdoses, accidents, Jane Does. It was the perfect storm of silence, women nobody protected, cases nobody fought for, a predator nobody was watching. And then it came full circle. And here's what makes it even more ritualistic. Samuel Little remembered them. He didn't just forget his victims. He drew them, dozens of portraits sketched from memory, holding on to their faces like trophies, like sigils. That's not just compulsion, that's ritual. And the silence wasn't just his, it was society's. These women were ignored, dismissed, written off. The system also played its part by staying silent as well. The ritual was bigger than him. He acted in silence, the police stayed silent, the public stayed silent. Until November 13th, when suddenly he speaks. On November 13th, 2018, Samuel Little was officially charged in Ector County, Texas for one of his cases. That date, November 13th, is the same date as Amityville. The same date as Idaho 4. The 13th again. A date tied to disruption, chaos, ritual. Maybe it wasn't random. Maybe November 13th wasn't just another square on the calendar when Samuel Little opened his mouth. Think about it. A man who targeted 93 people, who thrived on control, suddenly confesses on the very date tied to chaos and ritual. That's not just timing, that's theater. In ritual, confession is part of the ceremony. It's the release, the spoken word that seals the silence. By choosing the 13th, it's almost as if the ritual came full circle. The tragedies, the silence, and then the admission, all bound to the same number. Was it guilt? Or was it the ritual demanding to be acknowledged? And ask yourself this: why would a man who went unnoticed for decades, who lived comfortably in the silence of ignored victims, suddenly decide to speak? Why not the 10th? Why not the 15th? Why the 13th? Serial offenders thrive on control, on timing, on patterns. They don't just act, they orchestrate. And when the silence finally breaks, it's not accidental. It's deliberate. His confession didn't just bring closure, it marked a date, it carved the number 13 back into the timeline, the same number tied to Amityville, the same number tied to Idaho 4. Maybe that was the point all along. Maybe the confession itself was the final act of his ritual, the way he left his signature on history. And this idea of confession being ritualistic isn't new. Look at fraternities. Initiation often ends with confession, with pledges spilling secrets under candlelight to prove loyalty. In Freemasonry, silence and secrecy are everything, but confession, admitting knowledge to those above you, is what binds you to the brotherhood. In Scientology, confession isn't private at all, it's forced. Members sit in front of auditors, confessing their sins, their secrets, their weaknesses, with every word written down and held against them. Confession becomes a weapon. Silence is demanded, but when confession comes, it's on their terms, at their timing, to seal control. In Catholicism too, confession is a cleansing ritual. But even then, it's controlled by an authority figure who dictates forgiveness. Across systems, confession isn't about honesty, it's about power. So when Samuel Little confessed on November 13th, it felt less like guilt and more like ritual. Silence, tragedy, and finally confession. Each step part of a cycle we've seen in secret societies, in cults, and in crime that carries the mark of ritual from beginning to the end. So now you've got 3 dots on the map. Amityville, November 13th, 1974. Idaho 4, November 13th, 2022. Samuel Little's charges, November 13th, 2018. Decades apart, different offenders, different states, but the same number carved into the timeline. Amityville became a ghost story. Idaho became a neat case with a man in handcuffs. Samuel Little became a footnote in true crime, despite being the deadliest serial predator we've ever had. And in each one, the silence. Neighbors hearing nothing. Ask yourself, how many times do we have to see the 13th, the 112, the 1122, before we admit this isn't coincidence? How many lives have to be lost before we stop believing the story Hollywood sells us, or the neat little box law enforcement puts a pretty ribbon on? The truth is, once you see the ritual, you can't unsee it. And if Amityville, Idaho, and Samuel Little all carry the same signature, what does that say about the tragedies that haven't been uncovered yet? The ritual doesn't end when someone is caught. It doesn't end when the story is buried. The ritual lives in the silence, in the numbers, in history repeating itself. And maybe the real horror isn't that it happened. Maybe the real horror is that it keeps happening, right in front of us, while most people refuse to look deeper. The Amityville horror was never just about ghosts. It was about silence inside 112 Ocean Avenue. Decades later, silence returned at 1122 King Road. And when Samuel Little confessed on November 13th, the same date carved into both timelines, it became clear. The ritual doesn't belong to one man, one place, or one story. It belongs to the pattern. 112, 1122, 13. Over and over again. Numbers don't lie. Silence doesn't lie. What's been dismissed as coincidence has always been a signature. And maybe the most chilling part of this entire series isn't what we uncovered in the past. It's knowing the ritual hasn't ended. It's still moving through the present. And the question you have to ask yourself is, when it repeats again, will you even recognize it? Perhaps that is the true chill that lingers long after the headlines fade. The sense that what we call coincidence is really a rhythm we haven't learned to hear. Numbers become echoes, 112, 1122, 13, repeating like the refrain of a song no one remembers writing. Places become mirrors of one another, each with its own locked rooms and unanswered knocks. The stories we think we know, of haunted houses, of unsolved murders, of names whispered in the dark, are only fragments of a larger, older tale. It moves through decades the way a shadow moves across a wall. Slow, silent, impossible to trap. We look for monsters we can point to, but the pattern slips past police tape and history books. It doesn't end when an arrest is made or when a case is filed away. It waits in the gaps we leave, in the questions we stop asking. That's the real terror. Because patterns don't care whether we believe in them. They wait. They repeat. And one day, when the next date circles the calendar and the next headline flares across a screen, you'll feel it. That quiet recognition in the back of your mind. You'll know you've seen these numbers before. Stay tuned for the next episode. This one will shake you. We're pulling back the curtain on the entire Idaho police system and exposing why over 400 officers have been stripped of their badges. I personally filed an Idaho Public Records request to get the truth straight from the source. And, just as many of you might expect, the silence has been deafening. No response. No answers. Is it a delay? Or is there something they don't want you to know? Either way, we're not stopping until the facts come to light. This is the story they hope stays buried. This has been another episode of Criminally Human, where the truth has no filter. Please like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for joining me this evening.